Good viewer, you are watching Xirtus. This is because Xirtus makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Xirtus for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Xirtus, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Xirtus. Your friends will come to like Xirtus, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Xirtus. See, that was easy.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians!
Recent Tartarians! Recent Tartarians!
Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians!
Несмотренно образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, the skin's beautiful. Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномира, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching Xirtus. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, Xirtus.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.
Well, for those of you who survived the seizure warning, we are tiptoeing around. The title here is titular because of the terminology that triggers the toxin bells. But we're introducing, again, it's good to have him back, Leo Zagami, the ex-Illuminati and Italian expat, the Corsican prince himself. And, InfoWars has had you on a number of times. Check out his website, who also produces a number of books. He has a new one out right now from the Confessions of Illuminati. Well, I think it's volume 10. Right? Are you up to 10 now? So yes. That's pretty based, pretty exciting. Glad to have you back. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me on. I commend you for this incredible introduction. I mean,
I'm glad you didn't have a seizure. I'm glad.
No. It's psychedelic, but it's okay. It brought me back to my old rave days.
Right. I was thinking because you've talked about that. Yeah.
Yes. In volume 8 in particular, I talk about my involvement in the entertainment world. Yeah. However, thank you for having me on. Also for introducing to our viewers volume 10 of my Confessions, which, as you know, is the first book where I discuss Islamic Freemasonry and the secret societies in the Middle East behind this eternal conflict, which we are unfortunately viewing every day, and it's not getting any better.
But like we're standing right in the middle of the line, right, that they've drawn in the sand. We're standing on that line.
Well, I think that we are assisting to what was probably programmed for a very long time. So it's all part of the great show of the end times. But I leave it to you, of course, to introduce me and to give me your questions in regards to my latest work.
Well, there's so many things to ask you about. I mean, last time we talked about propaganda do, and I know that kind of plays into this as well, because the idea of sort of a worldwide schema of power that includes the Catholic Church, the Arab nations, the Arab League of Nations, and this idea of the Protestants, right? The Protestants through Freemasonry, right? And so I think it's interesting because in the end, it does play out to be sort of a religious or occult conflict, right? What would you say about that?
Well, when it comes to the Protestant world, in particular Anglicanism, definitely is behind British Israelism, which is itself behind fomenting certain aspects, which then, of course, manifested in the Balfour Declaration, in Zionism, and what happened later on after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. But as you know, in my book, I go through the whole story of Islam, and so the Ottoman Empire is part of it. And in fact, in this book, you mentioned P2, I actually have Arunyaya wearing a 33-degree sash. Arunyaya, together with the P2 representative here, he was initiated. Here is Arunyaya next to this senior P2 representative that we see also down here together with the Count Licio Gelli. So there is still the P2 element, because like you said, this is an international conspiracy. It's not only something that pertains to the Middle East or the West. And when we talk about 9/11, for example, we always had the false perception that it was only an inside job. What I said in my book, I explain how this is an inside-out job, because without those mercenaries, without those old alliances in the Middle East that go back hundreds and hundreds of years and go back to the time of the Knights Templars, which, as you know, inspired part of Freemasonry in the first place. And so this alliance was born because the Middle East is the home of the secret societies, is the home of the Illuminati, is the home of Freemasonry. Without those countries that today we know as Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey. Turkey, of course, is not the Middle East, but pertains also to a wider also empire, which was the Ottoman Empire, that eventually imploded because the French and the English Freemasons and Illuminati made it implode. they created, after 2 or 3 centuries of establishing lodges upon lodges of this new thing, which was speculative Freemasonry. I'm saying new, but in reality, we know Freemasonry is a very ancient. We can say that modern Freemasonry puts together many ancient mystery schools.
Right.
That's just
modern Freemasonry is more European, and the ancients more Middle Eastern. You're saying?
No, I think that even modern Freemasonry, speculative Freemasonry, would not have been possible without the Middle Eastern element, and the Middle Eastern enemy, which we perceive as an enemy, but in reality, it has been an ally of the Illuminati for a very long time. For example, the Rosicrucians, the Rosicrucians are also very influential, both within Freemasonry and also before the establishment of speculative Freemasonry with their manifestos. Now, one of their manifestos was the Fama Fraternitatis, which talk about Christian Rosenkreuz, this allegoric, legendary figure that is described as going through the Middle East to regain all this knowledge that then is brought back into us from Moorish Spain and then into what will manifest into the Renaissance. Now, it might be symbolic, but Christian Rosenkreuz is depicting the path of many people and also the path of the Renaissance itself, that will not have been possible without all this knowledge that was preserved by the Arabs and then came back to us through Moorish Spain. Now, I'm not saying that the Golden Age of Islam established anything new, but definitely they incorporated all these territories. They were expanding, and they were, of course, expanding from the 7th century onwards, where this religion was established in the Arabian Peninsula, in territories which had a wide and very ancient history. I'm talking about Sumeria. I'm talking about Egypt. I mean, and these places suddenly embraced Islam, but they embraced Islam not really throwing everything out of the window that, what the past was somehow preserved. And it was preserved in the form of secret societies. That's why the secret societies as a phenomenon, and this is something that many Masonic historians discussed and debated in the 19th century especially, will not have been the phenomenon of the secret societies, and so including Freemasonry, which is not really a secret society because everybody knows about it, but a society with secrets, and kind of brings all this knowledge from the Middle East, including Hermetism, Hermetis Trismegistus, and the basics of Hermetica will not have seen the light of day, will not have survived the dark ages that unfortunately at one point took over Europe. Europe, after the fall of the Roman Empire, went through some very dark periods. Culturally speaking, we were really left in the dark, let's say, and that light of knowledge was brought back to us. However, the Golden Age of Islam didn't really manifest into something that was enduring. And that's why today they are rather barbaric compared to their, brilliant past. And why is that? It's because they were expanding, they were absorbing other people's cultures, but they were not necessarily producing anything completely new. Of course, we can say that algebra is partly an Arab creation. We can say that even the algorithm, and so Cyber Satan itself is a little bit like the genie coming out of the bottle, and the name algorithm comes from a Muslim, so a great Muslim thinker. And we can say definitely that there is a lot of things that we are grateful for. However, then from that moment onwards, things started to, we saw a decline that was somehow also manipulated by the people that come in this place behind me, the Vatican. The Vatican is, as you know, the home of Christianity, the first home of Christianity. But in reality, we have also another part of Christianity that never recognized the Vatican and was also involved in the origins, like the Coptic Egyptians,
right?
Like the Oriental churches that eventually broke from Rome and formed what later on will be known as the Orthodox Church. So the Vatican though saw that, on the contrary of the Christian development, which was quite centralized and controlled by Rome from the very beginning, with the Council of Nicaea and the successive councils also, that kind of shaped up this religion. In Islam, from the 7th century onwards, and from the death of Muhammad, they started infights within their own family, within the people, his companions, and this eventually will give birth to the first branched off part of Islam, which was the Shiite part of Islam, that believes not only in Muhammad, but also in Ali, who was his cousin, husband of his daughter Fatima, and believes that from that line of this descend 12 imams that have this very special role in Shia Islam. However, because there wasn't a centralized control, like I explained in my book, suddenly we start seeing a proliferation of different forms of Islam that at times are so distant from original Islam, like the Druze, for example, that we don't even consider any more Muslims, because they don't respect the 5 tenets that the Muslims are supposed to respect, the 5 pillars. So the Vatican knew about these divisions taking place, and they were, of course, from ancient Rome, used to the divided impera and taking advantage of infights that could eventually manifest within the Islamic world. And they took advantage, and then later on they will eventually give birth to the Crusades. But like I explained in my book, the Crusades also is an inspiration that comes directly from the Muslim world, because without the Muslims using the Quran as their holy book that inspires the holy war, the Pope will not have manifested the idea of manifesting a holy war. So this is a concept that a lot of Christians will find fascinating, that the Pope was actually inspired for the Crusades by Islam itself, just like certain groups like the Knights Templars were inspired by Islam, like the Order of the Assassins. Now, at the time of the Knights Templars, the Order of the Assassins was a Shia Nizari group of people that had these castles like Alamut, castles in the middle of nowhere, impossible to take over. But in the end, we see that the Knights Templar made an alliance with the Shiite Nizari to fight the Sunni, and this just to show you how one fights the other within Islam, and then, of course, the third party, in this case, the Vatican, takes advantage and says, okay, we're going to ally with one part, and this started from there, but then developed through hundreds of years. And when you talk about Sufism was inspired by the fact initially that the Shia Islam that was established was not accepted by the Sunni authorities, and they had the tendency to go underground. They had the tendency to go underground to not get persecuted, and that gave them the reason to establish these secret societies that then the tariqas, the schools of thought of the Sufis, that then expanded as such in the Shiite world initially, and later on also in the Sunni world. They also included elements of the past religions that were taken over while they were expanding with Islam. We have the Zoroastrians, the Manichaeans, the Gnostics, and all this became part of this rich, how you can say, rich archives, rich culture that was present.
The lore, yeah, the lore.
But also in a specific lodge that I discuss in my book, which was based in Cairo. Cairo was, of course, home to secret societies and mystery schools that predate Islam. We go back to Memphis and, of course, Alexandria of Egypt, which also had very much the expansion of Gnosticism. I have a volume 9 that goes very much, delves very deeply in the subject of Gnosticism. Now, volume 9...
And the diaspora Jews in Cairo and Alexandria, right, with the Kabbalah, right.
Well, and of course, we had a very important Jewish community in Cairo. Cairo was called Al-Qaira and was a city, not Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaira. And but I mean, there is a lot of Al-Qaeda, let's say a lot of Egypt in Al-Qaeda,
Things come and go, right?
And there is a reason for that. You see, at one point, the Fatimid dynasty was established in Cairo. And they were Shiites, and they will rule a couple of centuries, and they will take over most of the Middle East and or even south of Italy. They established the Emirate of Sicily, where I come from, and they gave the basis for the future mafia.
Right. There's that whole, the word mafit is the mafit tax for the Jizara tax.
Yes. And that is very important. And like you said before, talking about the P2, as you know, the P2, we discussed it in the past, was like a supreme council of all the mafiosi from Calabria to Sicily to other parts of Italy that somehow could finally reach out into the banking system and into the proper business world through these Masonic contacts. And it's still like this today in Italy. However, the mafia itself was born because of a Muslim concept. The concept is if you're not Muslim, you have to pay tax, extra tax. And this was, in a way, also very convincing for a lot of people. It would be like the IRS coming to your door and says, well, you have this extra tax if you don't bow down 5 times a day to Mecca. That's okay. I'm going to bow down 5. if you reduce my tax by 50%, I will, So it was, I mean, I'm putting it like this in a very simplistic way, but at times...
I don't like that.
At times, it wasn't even the threat of the sword to make you convert. It was just simply people that didn't really feel obligated to their own religion. It was a little bit more difficult, though, with the Jews, because the Jews are very, their identity and their religion is very... So with the Jews, at one point, and the Christians, the Fatimid dynasty had a great relationship. In fact, most of the archives of the Fatimid dynasty were actually found in a synagogue in Cairo. So just to give you an idea However, the sixth caliph of the Fatimid dynasty, who thought of himself as the god of reason, the super Illuminati, he had established the house of knowledge, which was an outward expression of the Cairo Lodge, in which he said basically there would be only science and reason here, while instead the masses, as usual, will be manipulated with some kind of religious bigotry. But that religious bigotry became so pervasive that at one point he was killed. He disappeared in the middle of the night in Cairo, and nobody could find him.
Wow.
But he was actually brought to a new level by his followers, who then branched out in various versions of Islam, because this guy became almost a saint.
Like a martyr,
for not even a martyr. He was viewed as almost a god by his followers. He was called Al-Hakim bin Allah. So already the god, his name already includes Allah. I mean,
you're doing pretty well. Yeah.
Not every Muslim calls himself Allah. I mean, so initially he was called Abu Ali al-Mansur, but he transformed the name. So he became the most important figure in a number of Shia Ismaili sects to this day, such as the word 15 million Nizaris, who still exist today, the 1-2 million Mustalis, and also the Druze. The Druze, which are themselves a Arab-speaking esoteric ethno-religious.
Totally, right. I was asking some questions about that. I didn't want to interrupt you, but because earlier you brought up algorithm, from Al-Khwarizmi, right? And there's similar examples like alchemy from Al-Kemet. Even algebra is kind of Al-Hebrew. It's about the Hebrew studies. So kind of getting back to the Jewish numerology. And I wonder about that in Islam, because Islam it kind of feels like, if you read the Quran, it is a commentary on Abrahamic Judeo-Christian religion. Right, it talks about Jesus. It talks about the Jewish Yahweh, Allah are kind of the same thing, and it's maybe a Deuteronomist Jewish influence. Or what do you think about that?
Okay, there is. In fact, in my book, I discuss it. You see, this is a very good question you made, because in the first chapter of my book, I discuss first of all this story that has been circulating almost as a urban legend for many decades after this alleged Jesuit, Alberto Rivera.
I was going to ask. I wanted to know, what do you think about this guy? Is that too much?
That's what I'm... it's perfect that you brought this thing up, because Alberto Rivera features in my book because his story has some truth. But I debunked the part connected to the Vatican, because he said that the first wife of... first of all, let's explain the context. So Alberto Rivera, for those viewers who are, maybe ignorant about who this guy was and say, who the heck is Alberto Rivera? Okay, let me explain first of all who is Alberto Rivera. Alberto Rivera is a guy who suddenly came out stating he had a past as a Jesuit. And actually, there is some documents and there is some photos that prove that he seemingly proved that he was. However, he had these stories that he relayed to this comic strip guy who created a series of comic strips based on his stories.
Jack Chick, right?
Yes. Yeah. And what happened is that one of these stories was called The Prophet, and it was based on Muhammad. And what happens here is that the alleged Father Alberto, and I'm saying alleged Father Alberto Rivera because we always have to be very careful. The Vatican denied that he was ever made a priest, and let alone a Jesuit. However, like I said, there is documents that prove the contrary. But it's not this that interests me in my story, because, of course, here is mainly what happens when he went to this cardinal, this Jesuit cardinal,
right?
Cardinal Bea, a very important figure in the Jesuit world, who was also central figure for the Second Vatican Council, that, as you know, changed the history of the Catholic Church as we know it.
And helped excommunicate Latterwave, right?
No, but also led to this Pope that we have today, and led to this progressive church that we have, unfortunately, today. This Catholic Church that has...
he created Vatican II, but then he also Latterwave created the Society of St. Pius the 10th, right? Or 13th.
Well, yeah, of course,
and then Rivera had him excommunicated, right?
Well, yeah, initially, but then they tried to bring them back, especially Ratzinger, who was more of a conservative. They tried
you gotta control him
without losing track of where we are. Otherwise, it kind of branches out too much. What happens is that Alberto Rivera talks about Cardinal Bea. Now, Cardinal Bea apparently told him a story. The story is the origins of Islam, and the story about the origins of Islam apparently involves the Vatican.
Which is kind of believable, right? Like, that's like a pretty believable, like the Vatican getting involved with things.
It's believable if you don't know the story of the Middle East, but it is unbelievable. However, there is certain elements in the story of Cardinal Bea, alleged story of Cardinal Bea, because it's Alberto Rivera who reports this story. Now, let's remember also another thing. That Cardinal Bea's secretary was Father Malachi Martin during the Second Vatican Council. And Father Malachi Martin never really came out in the open and said anything bad about Alberto Rivera, to my knowledge. So this makes it even more believable that actually Alberto Rivera had been a Jesuit and is possibly...
Or maybe a student. Maybe he was almost there, right? Yeah.
No, there is photos of him actually already a Jesuit.
Okay.
So and there is a document that seems to prove that. However, we don't know. We can't say that with certainty, and I always base my facts on certainty. But one thing is interesting, that it takes the story that Cardinal Bea about the origins, the Vatican origins, is based on the fact that Muhammad, who was a merchant living in Mecca, and this is a real part of, this is proven by the hadiths, he married Khadija. Khadija was a rich widower. In Mecca, it was a pagan town, though, with 360 idols. Khadija was part of this Kaddish tribe that will become an enemy of Muhammad after he establishes himself with the Quran. The Quran, though, took decades to it wasn't just a channeling that a few days, like Aleister Crowley, 3 days, and he has the book of the law out. It took a bit of time. But he had married this rich woman, I think when she was 40. So he had all the time of the world to dedicate himself to go out of Mecca in this cave and allegedly channel and talk with this angel Gabriel, and receive this Quran. Now, there is though another element which is also reported in the hadiths that the Muslims tend to not want to talk about. And it is the fact that Khadija introduced Muhammad to her cousin, who was a Christian. Now, Alberto Rivera's account says that he was a Vatican agent somehow, but the facts are different because in reality, the cousin was an Ebionite priest. Now, an Ebionite is a Jewish sect, is a Christian Jewish sect that doesn't believe in the divinity of Jesus. And so this also will explain why the Quran itself doesn't portray Jesus as a divine being, but just as a man, a prophet.
That does make total sense, yeah, because he's like their rabbi, the Ebionite rabbi, exactly.
So here we have an element of the story that allegedly was given by Cardinal Bea that doesn't somehow fit in this context. Let's remember that the whole region was mostly in the hands of, there was pagans, but there was also Christians, and they were Oriental Christian, meaning that they were the basis of what would later become the Orthodox Church. I mean, there were the Oriental churches that never really got along with the Rome in the first place.
Manichaeans and all that.
To imagine this guy who was called Barak ibn Nafal, to imagine him being an agent of the Vatican is a little bit too far-fetched. Okay? However, the account of Cardinal Bea includes also other elements, including the elements of pre-Islamic goddesses that were discovered in Palestine, now Israel. There is some interesting elements in this, that also make us understand that either Alberto Rivera was an expert on Islam, because only people who have studied Islam for a number of years can know certain things, or otherwise this account might have had some veracity, I mean, might have been real. However, on the contrary of what my friend Eric Phelps, he took this account as being completely true and the Vatican behind Islam. I wanted to be a little bit more critical and more honest about it, because this book has in fact reached #1 in Islamic social studies, in the history of Islam, and in other charts on Amazon, and nobody has debunked it, and it has positive reviews even by the Sufis, who I've criticized in this book, because this book is based on facts. It's about not criticizing or speculating or making conspiracy. It's about facts.
Right. Well, okay, so, that's really good information. I like that. So the idea of the Ebionites.
If Rivera said something true, I take what is true, but what is not true, I criticize, and I'm sure that people.
There's an avenue there with the Ebionites, because the Ebionites are the idea that Catholicism is the monolithic Christian church, or the Christian belief structure that's happening, isn't correct. But the other question then, like to further it, is the Deuteronomists. You were talking about the 360 idols, kind of pantheon of Canaanite religion. What about the like Yahweh, Allah as this monolithic?
Okay. Now, an Ebionite priest gave Muhammad a monotheistic structure. Okay, and of course, being an Ebionite means being a Jew. Not a Jew, but a believer in a sect that was basically made of Jews that followed the Jewish belief but had embraced Jesus, even if they didn't embrace the divinity of Jesus, means that somehow he had embraced the Abrahamic faith that preceded him, okay, including elements of Christianity that we see then reported in the Quran. One thing that is actually interesting about all this is that once this the deliverance of this Quran comes through, the Khadija, the wife, says, and this is reported in the hadiths, the hadiths are those teachings which are not in the Quran, but they are reported as official by the by Islamic law. They are certified as being genuine. So the story of Muhammad being so vast, it couldn't be included only in the Quran, so they had these hadiths. And in the hadiths, at one point, Muhammad says, well, this guy, he has a couple of gardens in heaven. You have to respect him. This is a guy that you have to respect, even if he was a Christian. So he puts, and this is something that the Muslims never really talk about, this connection with Christianity. Even if it's not traditional Christianity, there is a connection with Christianity. The connection with the Vatican, though, comes later on, when the Vatican starts to see this religion expanding. Now, people here in the chat notice might have some misconceptions about me. I'm no longer an active Mason, and I've always been very open about my associations. As you know, I've written books about them. I was actually, one of my mentors in London was Julian Smith, who was the head of the Shriners in Europe. And the Shriners themselves were inspired by a guy who had been initiated into the Druze in Lebanon. So he actually had an important experience in the Middle East and then brought back this tradition. Now, for those who don't know the Shriners are not accepted as Muslims by the Islamic world. In fact, they have been kicked out of Mecca, because when you go and study the Shriners' rituals, you understand, yes, they embrace certain elements of Islam, but in reality, they still retain their Christian. It's a little bit like the Templars, who converted in secret but still retain elements of Christianity, of course, because they were a knighthood that represented Christianity. So this just to clarify this aspect. And of course, we had the important people here in America who were Shriners, even a president who received the Shriners in his Oval Office. So, I mean, the Shriners have been very important.
But you don't think that Shriners necessarily mean Muslim? Like, not secret, not all Shriners are secret.
They don't respect. I report you an episode that happened to me once. I was in a reunion in London, in a lodge in London. It was around 2005. And the guy in the lodge, who was at the time, we were operating this lodge. It was a lodge, irregular lodge operating on the Grand Lodge de France, but it was in London, and we had a schism, and then it was called regular. Without going into all this history that might not interest our viewers, he came up that day, I remember, with a story denouncing that the Shriners had disrespected Islam by snorting cocaine on the Quran and bringing prostitutes in one of their temples here in America.
Wow.
And this was, the guy was, of course, outraged by the fact that, Freemasons should ethically and morally be some people, people with a certain, though.
Yeah, it's like something you think would only happen in Dubai. Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, or Cairo, because a lot of people from the Emirates usually go to have fun in Cairo. Vice versa, now they go to Dubai, because it seems like Dubai is now the Disneyland of the Muslim world. But it's far from it. There is people, women living in slavery there, human trafficking, normal people being enslaved for. I mean, there is a lot of things that are.
I hate to make the joke, but that does sound like Disney.
Yeah. No, but it is terrible to see what the. So regarding though the Shriners, today the Shriners constitute a very important paramasonic body here in America. Why? Because they have established themselves with hundreds of millions that they have donated to charity for these hospitals for children. And because they go around parading with the fez and then the clowns for the children, they have become part of Americana.
Yeah.
But you can't consider them Muslims in no way, shape, or form. However, there is a big thing to say here that might instead be clarified and make understand a lot. In my book, I explain this. You see, because here in America, we had the segregation. The blacks, they couldn't join the white lodges, and then they shaped up their own form. They crafted their own form of Freemasonry thanks to a Mason that was a freed slave, Prince Hall, and it's known as Prince Hall Freemasonry. All the appendant bodies or paramasonic bodies associated to Freemasonry, like the Shriners, have a different reality in the Afro-American world that expanded in a different way. And in the African-American world, the Shriners ended up giving birth to two Islamic lineages that are indigenous to America. One is Moorish science, and the other one is the Nation of Islam.
Oh, okay, fair.
So this, when we go and study the history, and I explain this in my book, of the Nation of Islam and the Moorish science, we see that they were Freemasons that were inspired by the Shrine. I mean, they were inspired.
They just went further with it. They took it more seriously.
Yeah, they took it way too seriously, I'd say. I mean, while instead in the white context, I say white, meaning the Shriners that were, they kept it more like a social thing or a funny thing, like Laurel and Hardy made a movie, no?
Right.
The very important movie.
Sons of the Desert, right?
Yes. And then, of course, you have a president like Franklin Delano Roosevelt here that invited the Shriners in the Oval Office. And it became just a way of socializing one of the many fraternities. How many fraternities there is in America? I mean, there is way too many to even count them. You have the Elks, the this, the that. I mean, and everybody has an initiation that mimics Freemasonry in one way or another. But in any case, I wanted to explain to people that in the African American community, things went further. And it became very serious because Nation of Islam, it's very important now, regarded as a very important part of Islam here in America.
Yeah.
However, when we go and see the roots of it, it's not really Islamic. Even Moorish, I mean, it was like based on a bit of Rosicrucianism, a bit of Islam, a bit of Gnosticism, a bit of this and that, and then put all together. So I try to explain this, and it's important that we understand all this, because in the end, if today we have a lot of more anti-Semitism here in the United States, and anti-Semitism is a very vicious thing, is a very evil thing. And the creators of anti-Semitism, unfortunately, like I explain in my book, at times are the Jews themselves when they gave birth to the Sabbatean-Frankist schism, sect within Judaism.
Which he converted to Islam, right?
Yeah, and he converted authors to Islam in 1666. For those who don't know Shabbatai Zevi was this guy who came from Smyrna, Turkey, which is Muslim, but he was, of course, Jewish. He claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. And at that time, almost half of the population, Jewish population living in Europe, recognized him as being the Messiah. This was a big thing. Of course, the Christian world, it was 1666. They were waiting for the Antichrist. So when they saw this guy announcing himself as the Messiah, they said, this guy is the Antichrist. And they were actually kind of close to the truth, because this guy was an anti-Christian force that will manifest a lot of evil, not only in the Jewish world. And I explained this also in my prior books. Regarding Shabbatai Zevi, he went from Smyrna to Jerusalem and then to Gaza. Gaza, which today is in all the news every day for what is happening, is a cursed city because Shabbatai Zevi's John the Baptist, prophet, who announced the fact he was the Messiah, known as Nathan of Gaza. At one point, when the Jews, there was a lot of Jews that were not convinced, like especially in Jerusalem. There was, of course, the chief rabbi who seemed convinced, but the others, in the end, he was kicked out of Jerusalem. And at that point, Gaza became the holy city of the Sabbateans. And that is a curse. That is a curse, unfortunately.
When is this?
This was around 1660.
Wow. That's insane. That's really interesting.
Yes, it was around the time between 1660 and 1666, because then what happened was, when he eventually went back to Turkey, the Sultan threatened Shabbatai Zevi, said, you are a Messiah, maybe to your people, but you will have to convert to Islam.
Wow.
Otherwise, I will cut your head, I will crucify, I will burn you, I will do all kinds of terrible things. So Shabbatai Zevi said, okay, fine, I'm going to convert to Islam. The moment in which the Messiah of the Jews, or the alleged Messiah of the Jews, that's more correct, says, I convert to Islam, he lost almost all his followers. However, out of maybe 1.5 million followers around Europe, he still retained a couple of 100,000 in Turkey.
Okay.
And they gave birth to the Dome, which became the crypto-Jewish that outwards converted to Islam, but they will still carry on this heretical practice. Now, the heretical, you see here, makes it very who coercively converted outwardly to Islam, but retained their Jewish faith and Kabbalist beliefs. You see, it's very interesting to show, also give a visual to the people about what we are discussing, because these are facts. These are facts. It's not fiction. And it's not a history that is based on conspiracies. It's based on facts. And the facts at times are more astonishing than any fiction or any conspiracy. 100 years later, we have a guy called Jacob Frank. He says he's the reincarnation of Jacob of Sabbatai Zevi, and that's the Frankist. When we say today Sabbatean-Frankist, the Frankists come from that. Now, he was born within a Catholic context, and he brought to the Catholic Church 20,000 Jewish converts, and that gave him the possibility of being nobilitated. Though he was also persecuted by the Inquisition, he ended up living in a big palace, and everybody bowed down to Jacob Frank, who was, and then the cousin of Jacob Frank founded the Asian Brethren, who became a very influential Masonic society in Germany that influenced the birth of Shalarafia and influenced the birth of the Bohemian Club, like I explained in volume 9 of my Confession. So there is all this brings us though to the fact that the worst enemies of the Jews are the Jews, because those Sabbateans gave birth also to the Memphis rite of Freemasonry. The Mizraim was also established with connections to the Sabbateans. So the Sabbatean and then the Sabbatean-Frankists became very involved in Freemasonry. And the establishment of these lodges, which were the so-called Egyptian rites in reality, should be called maybe the Jewish Sabbatean rites. It would be more correct.
That's a question, right? Because again, with the Deuteronomists, because you have this monolatry of Yahweh and of Allah. It's this idea of monotheism, which is more emergent and more recent than anything else. And you're saying you've got 360 idols. The Egyptians have multiple gods. Is this a thing about monotheism? Like the fact that all of these religions are arguing over this really monolithic thing.
But it's also the fact that a lot of them are outwardly are giving us monotheism. Inwards, they're keeping these idols alive through secret practices. Like those 360 idols apparently might have ended up in a system known as the Sat Bahai, 360 degrees. Is a Masonic,
exactly.
You know, and suddenly we have it. So
we know this.
Yeah, no, but it is important that people understand
the rose compass 33. Sorry, go ahead.
No, the fact that there is this paganism that is retained in secret is something that even the European Illuminati and Freemasons learned from the Middle Eastern counterparts. Because they suffered probably that before even the Christians realized that there was these heresies going on. When is that we have the Maleus Maleficarum or the witch hunts that started? This was probably 5 centuries ago, no?
Yeah.
And at that point, we have also the birth of the Reformation, the Protestant, you know, the new thing that was starting to wage war against Rome. Christians were opposing and saying, no, the Pope is wrong on certain things, the Vatican is wrong on certain things. And then we have, of course, Martin Luther, we have
But
Calvin. this happened relatively closer.
I mean, the idea, exactly. The idea of the Lutheran Bible is kind of a answer to the Quran, right? Because the Quran is this permanent, eternal work that you repeat, you know, ritualistically.
Like, for example, when the Protestants, you know, like say we shouldn't have images in the churches, like in certain branches.
The Dutch iconoclastic period, right?
They took away the saints from the churches, all that, those images of the saints and stuff. They were kind of mimicking also what Islam was doing, which was completely not having any images, any portrait of any kind.
Yeah, Christian Sharia, right.
But there is, though, a very important thing that I show in this book, and I show it in the cover here, and I show it inside the book. that somehow this goes against most of the beliefs of the Muslim. The fact that in a Templar church, which in the 1950s, there was an archaeological discovery that was never made public for fear of reprisal from the Muslim world, of this cross, Mohammed with a turban on a cross. Now, the cross, not as the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, but rather as a symbolic cross. See, the cross has, as you know, esoteric meanings. So this Muhammad on the cross goes contrary to all the beliefs of Islam, because you can't represent Muhammad. Definitely you can't put him on a cross. So what were the Templars worshipping here? They were worshipping Baphomet. This is Baphomet. Baphomet, most people think Baphomet is this, which I show in volume 9. But in reality, Baphomet is this.
Muhammad, right.
Muhammad. Yes, and it's Muhammad, and it's an understanding of Muhammad on a cross, which is also esoteric, and so has element of Hermetica that can... When we see this representation of the Baphomet made by Eliphas Levi and then picked up recently by the Satanic Temple, we are seeing a representation. As you know, Eliphas Levi drew this representation basing himself on the Hermetica. What is below is above, and he did, so it's all based on Hermetica.
Not sure if you follow David Ewing Jr.'s work, but some interesting stuff here. Muhammad, this is a Kufic Arabic writing for the name of Muhammad in the name Ali, right? And there's a lot of really interesting stuff with the Alpha and the Omega, and you start to see Alpha and the Omega written in Arabic, right? Like in Ali, this is the Alpha and the Omega in Allah. So there's a lot of synchromysticism and synchronicity between the two religions, between Christianity, especially when you look at, like you were talking about Spain. Like Spain is the convergent point where you start to see churches that have this kind of Christo Sharia. They have sacred geometry on all the windows, and then they get rid of all the symbolism, even the faces of people shot off. Right.
We discussed earlier the Druze faith, for example. No?
Yeah.
The Druze faith was influenced by Christianity, by Gnosticism, by Neoplatonists, by Zoroastrianism, by Gandhar Buddhism, by Manichaeism, by Pythagoreans. We are facing religions which seemingly are new, but in reality embrace very old concepts, and they are absorbing them, so they are not rejecting them.
So what does Islam mean then? It's like the idea that Muhammad is that, I mean, again, you don't get killed, it's a tax, and you can believe what you want because Jewish, Christians, everyone can be part of it. What was Islam at that point? Like, what exactly are we talking about? Because it doesn't sound like today's Islam.
Okay, now, you know that, of course, in Spain in particular, there was a story of persecution.
There's a lot of statues of people's heads on the ends of swords in churches still, yeah.
Now, I've been a few times. I know Spain I had my grandfather was from Chile, and I had part of my family was the sister was living in Spain, and I've been there, and I think that it's part of my blood because, amongst other things, of course, I have Southern European blood, amongst other things, also Spanish and Portuguese. But
and the Ashkenazi, like Mozarabs, were such
then, of course, I have also Ashkenazi blood, but the Ashkenazis were based in Central Europe and more like.
Oh, there were definitely Ashkenazis in Mozarab, Spain, especially in the east.
They were more Sephardic, though.
Definitely, right? The Sephards ran it, like Maimonides.
But you can see it also in the way the Sephardic look and the Ashkenazi. They look in different, more Nordic. The Ashkenazi, let's say.
Right.
The Sephardic look like almost Arab. I mean, you can't. Now, when it comes to the development of these ancient mystery schools, so let's not forget also the Jesuits founded by Ignacio Loyola in Spain, and Ignacio Loyola himself being initiated in the Alumbrados, which were the Illuminati Gnostics of the time, which in Spain were also accused of heresy. And at one point, Ignacio Loyola actually abandoned Spain to go to Paris and study. But in reality, he had to abandon also because of the heavy accusations that he had been arrested 5 times by the Inquisition. This is the guy who in 1530 founded with a group of friends, the Jesuits, that will eventually be accepted 10 years later by the Vatican. But
those guys like who murder people and have inquisition sound way worse than the people taxing you for not being Muslim, you know?
Well, let's say one thing though about the Muslims. When they arrived and you were on the book, meaning the Quran, so only Christians, Jews, and Sabians were on the book. They will not cut your head, and they would make it. If you were pagan, they would cut your head if you were not converting. So they were really harsh with the pagans.
Wow.
Now,
so you had to be like about Yahweh. You had to be about the single one God. Yeah.
Now, they don't call it Yahweh, they call it Allah.
But it's one God and there's no other.
One God, and you have to be.
All right.
However, the interesting thing is that this, and I, of course, like to say this tale, which I also report in my book. When the Caliph, companion of the Prophet, arrived, one of the first caliphs, because you had the first 4 caliphs, the 5th didn't last that long. Rashidun Caliph were the ones that came from Abu Bakr onwards, and then led to the 4th one was Ali, and then there was. But one of these caliphs ended up in the city of Harran. Now, Harran is a city with a very, very rich and long history that predates Islam by thousands of years. It was established by the merchants of the city of Ur, which is very important for the Illuminati. It's a centerpiece of Illuminati. If you want to go and study Illuminati, you have to go. And that's why when Pope Francis recently went to Iraq during the pandemic, he went and celebrated with Muslims and Jews in the city of Ur. It's at the basis of Abraham and Abrahamic faith. You know, so it's really at the center of it all. Now, Harran was founded and is today the ruins of the city of Harran. And here you're showing the various deities and also the moon that becomes part of the Islamic faith.
All the people they would have beheaded you if you knew about, talked about, believed in, told your children about, right?
Now, what happened in the city of Harran? Yeah, just to be very exact, the city of Harran was an ancient city founded by the city of Ur merchants, and the city of Harran became at some point even more powerful than the city of Ur. Okay, now the city of Harran was invaded by the Islamic people. In fact, you have Abraham's house there in the city of Ur. So you have really the birth of it all, guys, because, I mean, we are all in the Abrahamic faith business here. If either Jews or Christians or Muslims, we all come from there. So
epicenter.
That's the epicenter of it all. Now, the city of Harran is interesting because the Caliph arrived and said, which religion are you? And these people were no stupid idiots. No, they didn't want to say, you know, we are this and that before they could say something wrong and then be beheaded on the spot. They consulted a lawyer and they said to the Caliph, you will speak with a lawyer when you come back from your further conquest. This is the first time really in history we have a lawyer taking so much heat and in a religious situation. He had to study the Quran in the matter of months, every single detail to understand how he could get out this mess. He found in the Quran the word Sabians. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody knew if they ever existed. The Muslims themselves didn't know who they were. So when the Caliph came back and he said, which religion are you? He said, the Sabians, a mysterious group mentioned 3 times in the Quran. Who are you? And he said, who is your God? And he said, Hermetes Trismegistus. So it's like, you know, Hermes. Suddenly they were like, the Caliph was, it's 3 times here in the Quran, here, and here. The lawyer was good. This lawyer was very good lawyer.
Must have been a Cohen, yeah.
Definitely a very good lawyer. So he was like, okay, this is a religion. It's in the book, so you have to accept us, just tax us, and that was okay. The Caliph was. Oh, okay.
It's like, all right, that tracks, yeah.
Okay, you're fine. You're spared. You can continue with your practice.
He was cool with the Sabians, but like Hermes didn't trip him up. Okay, all right, that's cool.
You know, they were like, wow. If the Prophet Muhammad mentioned them 3 times, they must have been very important. But it wasn't true. They were not Sabians. Okay, I really don't know who these Sabians are still. Nobody still knows who these Sabians are, I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah. I like the idea they could have been the Manichaeans, but there's no evidence.
They could have been, but in any case, the Manichaeans were still practicing also in the city of Haran. Haran was a very important city for the Illuminati in ancient times because they were worshipping the moon goddess. You showed the moon, Sin, which was also the name. There was various names for this moon goddess.
It says Astarte, but Asherah is the wife of the El Elyon, which is like in the Elohim pantheon. Before Abraham makes it all about Yahweh, Elohim is plural, right? So it's all it is that pantheon.
I would say that, but I will also say that in any case, you have to understand these moon goddesses in pre-Islamic Arabia were various. There were different ones. However, we see that the moon goddess is central to pre-Islamic, even in Egypt. Now we have, of course, Isis, just to give
Selene, the Roman goddess Selene, right, is really clearly associated, right?
But you have the goddess Sin, that it was like for the city of Haran so important. So it kind of like the mythology, Nanna, it was known also as Nanna. If you go and see Sin, show the Wikipedia Sin, you can see the image, the impression of the cylinder seal of that brings us. If you go on the good, and that isn't the moon the symbol that later on will become the symbol of Islam,
right? And also for Mother Mary, you have pictures of Mary on the crescent moon. It's associated with Asherah. It's the wife.
It's also associated with Isis.
It's the goddess. Yeah, it's the moon.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Jesuits, and here, of course, you have the crescent and the moon present in pre-Islamic world. So
maybe
Islam, actually, the first Muslims for the first couple of centuries didn't even place any star and moon together because for the fear of being pagan. You see, I think that in the first 2 centuries of the spread of Islam was actually trying to be serious about their monotheism, so serious that they went on to criticize Muhammad himself for having placed a citation known as the Satanic Verses, because Salman Rushdie made a novel based on it, which is, and this is very interesting because Muhammad apparently, he was kicked. He was almost immediately after the deliverance of the Quran kicked out of Mecca, and he had to go to Medina. That's why Medina now is the second holy place. You have 3 holy places in Islam, and that is Mecca, of course. And we are ending there is the ending of the Hajj now. So right as we're speaking, there is, of course, Medina, where he went for a certain number of years to take refuge from the Kodashi tribe that was persecuting him. And then there is, of course, Jerusalem with the Temple Mount, which is a whole other story. But in reality, we can definitely say that Muhammad at one point wanted the people of Mecca so badly to believe in this Quran that he actually writes, and this is in the Surah, he writes about these goddesses, saying they're actually quite good. And this is something that even the early Muslims couldn't forgive him.
They couldn't handle it, yeah.
And that's why when Salman Rushdie wrote his novel, he got a fatwa, because this is something that you can actually find on Wikipedia, Satanic Verses, not the novel, but the Satanic Verses referring to Muhammad. There is actually probably a Wikipedia page about the Satanic Verses. Satanic Verses are, let me see. Maybe
I just went to ChatGPT, but I can do Satanic Verses Muhammad.
Yeah, you can put it on the and it is, of course, not the Salman Rushdie Satanic Verses, but they are the words of satanic suggestion, which the Islamic prophet himself, it says, is alleged to have mistaken for divine revelation. So the Muslims, when they saw what he said about this goddess, said, well, he's going a little bit too far. This is satanic. It was like Muhammad was trying to convert everybody to monotheism, but suddenly he had to deal with these Arabian goddesses because they were way too powerful in Mecca. It's not acceptable, even for the early Muslims. And the early Muslims, on the first 2 centuries of the spread of Islam, the early Muslims, they didn't believe in the that Muhammad was perfect, so they could actually criticize him.
Right.
Around the year 1000,
no more.
No more. He became almost a god. Not a god because, of course, he was never a god like Jesus, but he was given this status of not being able to do a mistake. So then they have.
But what do we do? Yeah, what do you do with this? And why do you call them satanic? So, like, interesting that the women, the feminine goddesses, it's satanic, right?
Well, they hide it. They hide it, and that's why they didn't like Salman Rushdie bringing back to light, this weak spot of the Quran, which says about the goddesses. No, it was a weak spot, and so that's why Ayatollah Khomeini got furious and gave this fatwa, which unfortunately brought. When it was last year, Salman Rushdie to be stabbed in the eye, which is, and this fatwa was given by Khomeini, who has been long dead.
Decades ago, right? Yeah, it's crazy.
I explain in this book also.
So yeah, that's important. He was fatwa because he wanted to bring light to this gospel that Muhammad had shared with the world.
Yeah, he wanted to bring some clarity. He wanted to, the Muslims simply don't want to express why there was why Muhammad was praising free pagan Meccan goddess.
Did Muhammad address that ever? That he had said that? Did he say he had channeled this?
No, he in the Quran.
They just decided this later. Okay, 100 years later, right? Okay.
No, that's for the first 2 centuries. Actually, the Muslims who read this surah is Quran 53:19. You can go and check it.
Yeah.
It says, "Have you thought of Al-At, Al-Huzza, and about the third one, Manat?" ? And he's not critical about them. And then it's like Satan tempted him to utter the following line: "These are the exalted Quranic whose intercession is hoped for." And they say that this is basically something that Muhammad himself was corrupted with. And of course, this is not acceptable for modern Muslims. I guess that the Muslims of the origins were a little bit more open-minded and critical about such thing. And then instead it became something that couldn't be criticized or discussed any longer. No? The Expedia refused the worship of this goddess. This is more, you see here. It shows like they are refuting them, like they are, but in reality, it's not so clear when you go and read it in the Quran. So,
it's like they're the wives. It's like they're his wives. Like, have you considered Al-Allah, Azula, and Manat, the third and the other? Is the male for you, and for him the female? That then is an unjust division. They are but names which you have named, you and the fathers, for which Allah has sent down no authority. Okay, so it's like saying that's really interesting. I think that kind of is that would make a very deep and interesting version of Islam. Just that one verse would change everything.
But you see, there is in reality a deeper version of Islam in the Sufi world, in the secretive world that always initiates people before giving them any truths, because they have to be sure that they can give.
Well, you have criticized the Sufi. Well, I don't know if it's the right word, but
I have criticized them because they have kept within them, retained some dark elements which are typical of the Illuminati, and that definitely have also influenced people like Aleister Crowley, who was initiated into a Sufi tariqa called Aisawa, and who then the anagram became Aivas, and who himself thought of Islam as a anti-Christian force that he could use for fighting Christianity. Let's not forget that he was brought up in the Plymouth Brethren. He hated Christianity because of this conservative Christian sect that he was brought up into, that he couldn't digest from a very early age. And so then he went on this rampage and this war against Christianity with the deliverance of his own book of the law, which he channeled, in fact, in Cairo, which is the city of the Lodge of Cairo. He didn't channel in any other part of the world. Now, we don't have much time, but just to be very synthetic about it, I dedicate a whole chapter about the dark side of Sufism, the fact that there were people like Mansur al-Alaj who were and are still to this day revered as holy saints of somehow of this religion, but very controversial, because at the time Mansur al-Alaj was killed by the son of Saladin for being an heretic, but then the wife said, you have to keep the head because he was so holy. So you kill them and then they're holy. We see this kind of thing happening a lot of times, even with Rumi's son and other people that followed up on Rumi's
keeping icons and heads, right? I know you said, I know we don't have much time, but in terms of the Sufi, I mean, like, we connect them with like Sophism or philosophy. Do you consider the Neoplatonists and Hellenistic Jews and Greek, Jews to be like the roots of Sufism, or what's like the backstory for Sufism?
So the Sufis is, like I said earlier, when you start expanding from the Arabian Peninsula, you arrive in Persia, the first thing you encounter is Zoroastrianism. That is one of the first things. Then you have the Manichaeans that we just mentioned. You have many others. I mean, you are arriving in places rich in history, which they're not going to just throw away all their books and say,
and they have to keep it
when the Persians for the first time started to read this Quran, the Illuminati of the Middle East, they were not particularly impressed.
Right. So they had to keep it secret.
They thought this book is good to dominate the masses. The oppressed that must be kept oppressed. And unfortunately, this is what happens with the religion. There might be a prophet that somehow is genuinely delivering something, but soon after it gets hijacked immediately by the Illuminati, by those forces who want to use the religion to oppress the masses. And this happens also, of course, in Christian context, and happens in other religions. Religion, unfortunately, in the hands of unscrupulous people, is a diabolical tool. No matter how genuine is the revelation, because you see what happens today in Rome. Do you think those people deserve being the representatives of Jesus on earth?
Right, rather be Utah. I don't know. I think about the Sufi, though. This idea that they're keeping secrets because otherwise they'd be killed for not sharing them. I mean, don't you think that kind of makes sense, that they're saying, okay, we have this deep mysticism, and
the Sufis are the natural the natural secret societies that can dialogue with Freemasonry in Europe and in the Western world. It's like their counterparts in the and like we go back to what we said earlier. Freemasonry and other secret societies in the West were born because we had to hide knowledge from the church, okay? And the church will not. The same thing happened in Islam from an earlier stage, because the moment in which Shiites started to develop opposing what was the traditional Sunni view, they already had to establish it. And plus, on top of that, Shiites, where did they develop? The Shiites mainly to this day, where are the Shiites? In Iraq and Iran. What was Iran and Iraq before they were ever Iraq and Iran? We're talking about ancient Mesopotamia. We're talking about the very birth of our civilization, and this is very rich in history, and this knowledge couldn't just be thrown out of, like that. It was just developed in a way that it could be made acceptable and hidden when it wasn't acceptable for the religious bigotry. But also it's a matter of convenience. Like Jamaluddin al-Afghani, who was an agent of Great Britain in the 19th century, founded an important obedience lodge, Grand Lodge, actually, more lodges in Cairo, became the father of modern Islam. Today, Islamic people, they don't want to face their demons. They don't want to say that the founder of the Salafi movement was a Freemason, was an Illuminati, was a friend of Madame Blavatsky. That's why I wrote this book, to show even the Muslims that you have as much problems as we had here in the West.
We're tied together, for sure.
They're all tied together, and you can't just play and say, like the Muslims do, Crusaders, Freemasons, you are all sinners and you are bringing sin. Oh, what? Let's be realistic about it. You have your own Freemasons who are actually heads of two Sufi tariqas, heads of the most important universities, heads of the most important Islamic branches in all schools of Islam.
Yeah.
So,
what do you guys think's going on in Turkey? Come on.
Yeah, Turkey, today we have Erdogan, who apparently is a lot of people say, like Ataturk might have some Dome blood, and Ataturk himself was initiated in a lodge which was in the hands of the Dome, Salonico. And the same. Yeah. In the same environment, we find then Rudolf von Sembotendorf, who brings the secret rituals of Turkish Sufi Freemasons to Adolf Hitler. So, and we have all this hate for the Jews that is transmitted also by the Sufi world. So sometimes calling the Sufis what they're not, because we just identify them with some honey poetry from Rumi or some other BS, this vision that the New Agers have of Sufism because of their poetry, their beautiful thing. No, guys, we have to be more realistic about that. And if we actually study the history of Sufism in the last 3 centuries, especially in Northern Africa, well, there is very little peace with Sufism. There is a lot of actually Sufi groups that were involved with when the fights to establish their own countries, like Algeria,
creative radical violence. Yeah,
Sufism is so important in Pakistan. In Pakistan, don't tell me that Pakistan is a tolerant nation, because the Pakistanis here to America, the most intolerant people ever, and they force their women in the terrible marriages, in terrible situations. So, I mean, we have to be a little bit realistic about it, seeing only the whirling dervishes in Turkey going around and stuff. That is part of the tradition. But this is part of the tradition.
It's best take, yeah.
Yeah. So I thank you for giving me the possibility today to have very interesting discussion. Maybe we can continue it in the future, because I guess we have a lot more to discuss.
I hope to God. Everyone should be making sure to go to leozagami.com, where you can pick up his new book and all 10, because he's got a series of 10 of the Confessions of the Illuminati. If I can I'm trying to pull up a picture of it. If I just click on it right, open image somehow. Well, let me do it.
You should probably go on the article. No, you should probably go directly on the Amazon page.
That's the best way to do it.
That's volume 9. That's volume 9.
Okay.
Which is also a very good book. Volume 9, it's also explaining you the Gnostic roots of the Illuminati, which is a topic which probably will take us a lot more time. We didn't have today. Maybe we can continue.
That will be fun. That will be fun. At some point, we should talk about the Ebionites and the Marcionites. I think it's really important, like the difference between Pauline Christianity, and also I'd love to talk to you.
The difference, like I say in volume 9, between the Essence and Gnosticism. The Essence were not Gnostic, but there was a lot of misunderstanding by some Masonic authors, even by Albert Pike, about this topic, or John Yarker. There was a lot of misunderstanding before the discoveries that were made from 1945 onwards, the Dead Sea Scrolls and so on. There was a lot of misunderstandings regarding if the Essence were Gnostics or were not Gnostics, but they were probably like the Ebionites at one point, and that's a very interesting also discussion that we could have, like many others. I think that is important also that people realize that anti-Semitism, or simply and stupidly criticizing Zionism without knowing the history of Zionism, labor Zionism is evil. And the establishment of the State of Israel was unfortunately connected to these labor Zionists, these communist socialists, these people that were connected to the Sabbatean-Frankists, which was
apocalypticists.
I dedicate the last chapter of this book to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, to explain how they were used and how they will eventually end up in the hands of people like Hamas that put him in their manifesto. So I think that there is a lot of misconceptions that we can clear up maybe for your viewers in a coming discussion.
I think that would be great. Everybody check out Confessions of Illuminati Volume 10 by Leo Zagami. Leo, thank you for being here. I hope to...
Yeah, somebody says a very interesting question because they say, why should we trust this guy? Well, just go and read the book and see if you can debunk any of it, because there is also, and this is very important that people understand, in my books there is footnotes and citations, and the citation here there is like over 700 footnotes and citations from reliable sources, from the academic as well as the inner circles of the mystery schools and the secret societies, and there is photographic as well as documentary evidence, archaeological evidence. Things have to be based on facts, not speculations. And so I hope that people can go and check it themselves. I mean, you showed now volume 10.
Yeah.
You see there is 5-star.
Yeah, just read the book and see what you think. Like, honestly, why should you trust anybody? What are you doing trusting people?
No.
What kind of nut job are you?
Also, 1 hour and a half, 1 hour and a... What can you do? An author can only scratch the surface of a book which is 400 pages, or another one that is 500, or another one that is 600 or 700. I write books that are at times over 500 pages. Do you think I can really seriously give you, this whole topic?
I will say this: you should check out his last video we did as well, because it's a lot of all the information we have here is really deeply personal, and so you can see exactly why he knows what he knows. But more importantly, this is all just information it's out there. I mean, I was really interested in this stuff from personal experiences in Argentina, which tied to propaganda too. But if you look into it, you'll find out basically all of this stuff is. There have been trials. There's been car bomb explosions. There's been people that have been arrested and put.
Well, I mean, myself, this year I became American and I had to give up on my Italian citizenship because I had to flee Italy in 2019, because for 5 years I was working with Alex Jones, and this created the basis for me having to flee Italy because of
they kill people in Italy, right? Like it's
maybe people don't realize also that some people say, "Oh, you are rejecting your Italian citizenship. You should keep it. That's where you're born." Guys, if you keep a dual citizenship, you are still, with it by Italian law, subject to their constitution, and their constitution is a joke that doesn't protect journalists or authors, and brought me in front of a kangaroo court that wanted to arrest me only for what I wrote in my first book, let alone the other 9.
Yeah, they haven't even seen the rest of it yet. Yeah.
So thank you for having me on, Andreas, and I hope to speak to you soon for part 2, where we can go further into a very interesting discussion with you, because one thing I like about your interviews, they are never superficial, and they're very much down to the point and in depth. And that's important.
I appreciate the same about you. God bless you, Leo. I'll see you soon.
God bless
you. This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.